So, here I give my review of Cobra Kai. Now, I have to tell you a bit of my backstory because I was a huge Karate Kid fan when I was younger. I watched the movie back when it first came out and was just like enamored by this idea of like taking karate lessons and going to a school. And that's what motivated me to get into martial arts when I was really young. I started at the age of 9. And I remember when our dojos, our schools were really rough. Like they really weeded out the weaker people, like you doing push-ups all the time. It was very like boot camp disciplinarian, and slowly these kind of schools turned more into, they were more designed for kids and not designed to weed out people. They were actually run more like businesses, and to some extent I'm kind of nostalgic for that time because that was the training I really wanted as a kid. I craved discipline. I craved the idea of working with really competent people and pushing myself to the next limit. And with that spirit, you have Cobra Kai. Now, without giving away too many spoilers, I'm going to talk about a little bit what the plot is. But for those of you who have or have not seen The Karate Kid, please go watch it because it'll help you enhance the viewing of this movie, which basically is a spiritual successor and complete sequel to the original movie. Now, in that movie, a guy named Daniel is beat up by these kids in high school, and he's taught karate by this guy named Mr. Miyagi, and he develops kind of a close bond and relationship with him, and he goes to a tournament and he beats his prime rival. Now that same prime rival, Johnny, comes back in this movie, and it's kind of like the first time we've really seen much of him since the first Karate Kid. Now, he gets kind of beat up at the end by his own instructor, and you can actually see how life kind of failed him. I mean, he really bought into this. He had a role model that was trying to teach him, and when he just didn't quite live up to his expectations, well, he got bullied himself. So you can kind of see where these two characters kind of come in, and they have now, we advanced it over 30 years, and we see that Johnny isn't doing so good. He's kind of living in a rundown apartment. He's working some menial, jobs as a handyman. Meanwhile, Daniel LaRusso has gone on to open up a car dealership and make lots of money, and he's very successful. It's interesting to note that he got his love of cars probably from Mr. Miyagi. If you remember, for those of you who've seen the original movie, Mr. Miyagi was a real car guy. He had all these old vintage cars that he worked on in his yard. So Daniel LaRusso basically kind of actually learned that from him as well. I'm not sure how many people actually got that, but that's where I was like, why would he go into cars? I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Mr. Miyagi was a car man. He fixed and restored old cars. So maybe this is kind of where Daniel LaRusso gets his idea for starting a car dealership. Maybe he just fixed up old cars and sold them, and that's how he started, and then he has a huge dealership now. So it's interesting that Mr. Miyagi kind of makes his way into the movie even as a mentor for Daniel LaRusso's business. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, what I want to talk about is the major theme. I've only watched the first 2 episodes because they're free on YouTube and you can watch them as well. But the theme of this seems to be how people deal with masculinity. I did a video some time ago about how toxic masculinity really isn't a thing. It's a label. And what you're seeing out of this are 2 very different paths about what masculinity has done to these kids and how they dealt with it from the time that they were in high school until the time they were adults. And I haven't seen the whole story, so I'm probably going to do a second review and to see if some of my predictions or ideas about the theme actually play out. Now, as we know, Daniel won. He goes on. He has other wacky adventures with Mr. Miyagi. He has other karate tournaments. But at the same time, Johnny seems to kind of just disappear off the earth and fall into a black hole. We learn that he has a kid, that he's probably got a broken relationship with his wife, not so good with his parents either. Meanwhile, Daniel's married, has kids, is doing great. The interesting thing about this is that it tells you a little bit about, first of all, how important role models are. I mean, if you look at Johnny, he didn't have a very good role model. It doesn't seem like his parents were very good role models, but at the same time, his karate instructor was not. Mr. Miyagi, on the other hand, taught a very good life lessons to Daniel that he later used and utilized and created a business for himself and so forth. So Mr. Miyagi was a really good role model, and, well, let's face it, Johnny just didn't have one, and his life is in ruin. Now, at the same time, it's also sort of showing you how anger and frustration and madness can all be really strong motivators for individuals. And if you want to say that Johnny sort of represents the bad side of masculinity and that he let it overtake him and became a mess and his whole life fell apart, well, yeah, that's true. That's what it's portraying. That Daniel used his anger and frustration and vetted into improving himself. There's the positive side of masculinity. So we have these 2 little models of it. Now, Johnny has, in this new series, started his own karate dojo. He reopened the Cobra Kai dojo. So that's all in the spoilers in the trailer, so That's basically the plot of it, and it seems like maybe Daniel LaRusso sees it and he's kind of like, not going to happen. So we're starting to see a sort of setup and even possibly a second generation of individuals come into it because Johnny trains new people, Daniel has kids, that sort of thing. It seems like it might actually start to be playing into the same themes that are repeating each other. So it's kind of an interesting story in that karma is going to sort of warp itself back into its original place, as it often does. So that's the sort of story that's getting set up here. And you actually see Johnny in this series get very frustrated, get very angry, and decide to do something positive with it, which is open up a school and start to teach the next generation. Now, he's teaching the old style of Cobra Kai, which is strike hard, strike first, no mercy, sir. So he's keeping with this theme of, you got to just be a badass. So in a lot of ways, he represents the dark side of masculinity. And Daniel LaRusso represents the good side, right? We almost have like sort of the force going on here with the light side and the dark side here. And ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see where this plays out and if this theme continues. And if, for example, somebody, one side is really taken over the other. We kind of see Daniel as just kind of being kind of a blasé character. The main character seems to be Johnny, who's the main person who is the story is centered around. And whether or not he's going to be redeemed, I think, is the central question of the story. And whether or not he's going to be redeemed through competition, training the next generation of students, imbuing their philosophy, or possibly even learning a new philosophy. Because the question is, can you teach an old dog new tricks? Is he going to learn something new? Is he going to change his ways? Is he going to be different? And I think that's kind of where this story is going. So I find it very, very compelling. And its take on masculinity to be something that I think a lot of people are craving. There's so much talk about how masculine characters are getting gutted and that they're being replaced, or that they're sort of like these new types of characters and they're not like these ballsy old action heroes from the 80s, but you're taking what are probably two of the least testosterone-driven action heroes of the 80s, because you could go with Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, and you could have Rambo and Commando and those movies where it's basically all guns blazing, shooting and killing. But this was about two guys competing in high school, which hits home to me because that's what I did. I actually did have some rivals in high school. We were very good friends. We would fight in tournaments and then we'd hang out afterwards, and that's kind of how all that happened. Like, I found competition between my other males, because I like competed against males. Kind of fostered a friendship and like a bond between you, and you had mutual respect for each other. So it's interesting that in this story, these characters actually have a lack of respect for each other, but that it's all about this sort of internal characterization and struggle and the outer forces that let them down. If the coaches had just been slightly better, especially Johnny's coach, if his sensei had just been like, what, it's sports, you got to do your best, and you still have to do really well, and we'll have a fun, friendly rivalry. Like lots of towns have friendly rivalries with their neighbors, and for example, the Red Sox and the Yankees, and so forth, have really great rivalries and so forth. And you want to see that aspect of it, that friendly competition can win out, and it doesn't have to be these bitter rivalries. But that's what the Karate Kid was kind of about. Now, at the same time, I want to just talk about how they did it right. Oh my gosh, did they do it right? How many times did they not do it right? Like Ghostbusters, not done right. Let's reboot something, but then just forget about everything else. They went back to the original characters. They introduced new and interesting characters. They introduced more diverse characters. One of the main characters seems to be Hispanic. They don't really name exactly what his ethnicity is, but they have an Asian character and so forth. So they have this diverse group of kids, rather than just changing the Karate Kid to another skin tone so that they can say that they're diverse. So, that's a big, to me, step, was they bring in the old characters to bring in new characters, and I think that was a really important thing. I think Star Wars could have done this, and they kind of missed the mark a little bit. They tried bringing in Han Solo. That worked for a little bit, but then they had Luke Skywalker kind of be there, but not really be a mentor as much as he could have. I think this is doing it right. I think this is bringing back the original characters, their original themes, and saying there's a new generation that's going to learn from the stories and mistakes and lessons that we all learned from our people, from the people that trained us and taught us. So It's really well done, and I look forward to watching the rest of the series. I may have to get a Red account just so I can watch this. You can try it for free, and I'll probably just binge watch the whole thing because it's a really good series and takes me back to my childhood. So that's it for now. Hit the like and subscribe button. I don't do a lot of reviews anymore because I don't have as much time as I used to, so I thought this would be a good one to shoot out, having checked out the first 2 episodes, which are free, which you can also check out. So if you like and subscribe, maybe I'm going to get to a review of the rest of the series in a little bit. All right, I'll be back pretty soon because we got more notes coming from the studio. Big news, big things happening. Like and subscribe.